My memories are that, you know, I continued to feel emotionally connected to the music all the way through. You know, I still felt sort of a lump in my throat singing "Amen, we shall overcome" as much at, you know, the last time as I did hearing it before I got into the group. You know, my name is Andy Gersick. I graduated in '96, and started. I joined Shades. I got into Shades in my sophomore year, so I can't remember how to count school years, but I think that means 94, 93, 94, 94, 95, 96. Mm-hmm. Right?
That sounds about right.
I started out as a tenor, but then I became a bass because I think we didn't have that many basses, and I'm baritone, basically. Right. So then I got to experience that thing where the bass section feels that they are the real men of the group and treats the tenors poorly. All those singing groups really come at you at the beginning of freshman year, and when you're kind of not sure what you're going to do with yourself exactly or who you're going to be in college, there's this feeling like it's really important. I remember it's so strange that all these people that never sang in their lives and don't know how to sing and don't particularly want to sing would sort of try to join these singing groups. And I didn't have, as a freshman, I didn't have much perspective on things, but I did notice that Shades, the only one where I actually liked the music was Shades. And I wasn't really sure, like, is this something I want to do in general? Do I want to be like one of these like doo-wop Dukes men guys? See, this will not end up in any video, but do I want to like be like or whatever? So I dropped out, but then by sophomore year, when I had matured and I was 19 or whatever, it was like there was no doubt that Shades was something that I wanted to do, and I felt like I wanted to do it in a much more serious way. Like I already had friends at that point. I knew that I didn't have to be in some sort of group. Then it felt like much more of like a choice, that it was just something I really wanted to do, because I went to some concerts and I loved the music, and so. I remember a lot of things very fondly, definitely. Well, I don't have favorite people in Shades. I mean,
who do you remember?
I used to fight with Anika Larson a lot because so I had sort of a stage crush, like a celebrity crush on Anika before I joined the group, because she was an amazing singer and an amazing performer. And I saw her do Glory, Glory at some concert, and I was like very taken with that. And then when I joined the group, she was constantly angry with me because I would make little jokes in like moments when we were supposed to be like in the shoe or whatever. And so I then had a responsive anger, and we would, I mean, not really, but like we would like butt heads a lot, which we ultimately made up, and then we've been friends since. But so I remember Anika very well because she got mad at me a lot. I remember Orlando very well, and it's very funny, or Oz, because when you are 19, you can feel that a 21-year-old is like this sort of older brother slash somewhere between like an older brother and like obviously not like a father figure, but like Orlando was a very imposing, impressive guy, and so I was very like gratified when he sort of liked me and was sort of took me under his like Shades wing or whatever. But I mean, there were lots of people, like everybody. I mean, Jason Gordon was one of the older people. I mean, he was 1 year older than me, but he seemed like he really knew what he was doing, and would like, you know, his idea of a skit for in between songs would be to like do a flip and land on his head and seem to have paralyzed himself, and then like jump up and be like, oh, I'm still alive. Like that's pretty much what was his thing. Sean Hudson, I don't know why I'm mentioning, well, anyway, Sean was really funny because he had no shame. He had the tackiest little blonde ponytail bump when we first joined. It was so funny. It was just like he dyed just this little nub of hair blonde, and then he was great because he was an amazing performer. But it's like it's okay for like famous people to do certain things, but then when you know that person, it's just so funny to watch them practicing it. So Sean had a lot of like looks and a lot of like whoos, and it was sort of like it was hard because he was just this kid, and like when we were in rehearsal and he was sort of like doing this, I can't do the things he would do, but the little and the little like whatever little bits of showmanship he would add in were really hilarious from the backstage view, but they went over very well, and you had to give it to him. I mean, he was a great singer. I don't know, everybody, I mean, I'm mentioning the people, it could be alphabetical order. Like, everybody was great in one way or another, and everybody made the group, you know, what it was. Like, my friend Nicole Lewis, who's still singing and performing now, she was my friend who encouraged me to, yes, go ahead and try out in my sophomore year when it was more intimidating in some ways because I was more serious about it. And so that was really nice to have a friend before I came in who I already knew and could sort of talk about what it felt like to be in the group. I remember when we went on our tour my last year, the guys got really interested in writing little songs, and so we wrote songs about every little step of our tour, like we were in California when we were almost killed, and Kwame Jackson saved our lives because there was a car parked in the fast lane of the highway, and as we we crossed a corner, and all of a sudden there was a car with no headlights on, a Mercedes parked in the fast lane, and Kwame like has quick reflexes, and he got us out, and we went up on two wheels because we moved over so fast. Anyway, but we were in California, and so the guys wrote a song about walking down Venice Beach, checking out girls, and we wrote a song about going miniature golfing, and I can't remember. We wrote like two more, and then we performed one of them at the Jam, which was ridiculous because it was about trying to go miniature golfing, and the lyrics didn't make any sense if you weren't in our group, but we got a big ovation anyway, so that was really fun. I mean, everything was really fun. I'm sure that's not true. Like, I remember there was plenty of mess all the time. It was sort of part of the deal. There was a lot of debate all the time about how closely we should stick to the traditions that obviously weren't that old at that point, but sort of the traditions of how we conducted ourselves, how we conducted Rush, how we conducted ourselves performance-wise. Not so much debate about what the sound should be like, because I think everyone who had joined the group wanted it to sound the way it sounded that made them want to join the group. And we knew we didn't want to sound like the other a cappella groups. But there was debate about, do we sort of recruit kind of aggressively the way other groups did? That thing I was saying earlier in this, that doesn't translate. But I was talking about how, kids came at, and they're like 17, 18 years old, and there's this intense pressure from all these groups, and we had lost a number of people that we wanted because they were kids and they got aggressively approached by other groups, and we were more standoffish. People thought we were very cool, but they also thought maybe we weren't necessarily that much fun, I think, to be around. I mean, we were fun to listen to, but we were very adult in the way that we carried ourselves, or at least tried to. So, that was nice. It was nice to be cool and all, but then we kept losing these good voices because other groups were like, come to our slumber party, or whatever. So there was debate about that, about how do we strike the right balance in terms of how we approach people we would like to be in the group. There was debate about just how serious we needed to be in general all the time. And there was a lot of people would say, like, if you did something that someone didn't like that much, they would say, well, TT would never do that. And that got thrown around a lot. There was a lot of like, what would TT do? It was very like, we needed those little bracelets that the kids have now, the more conservative kids, the sort of WWTD question mark bracelet, because there was a lot of like, what would TT do? What would TT do? So we had this struggle that was kind of ongoing all throughout the time that I was there, at least, to compete, because it was, even though people loved our music, there was this social competition of like, trying to get all these groups trying to get kids to join them, and trying to seem as broadly appealing as possible in order to do that. For their own perpetuate. Every year you lose, people that you wish you hadn't lost. You lose some of your best singers. You lose some of your most important just people in the group. And there's this feeling of, it's amazing how every year there's this little undercurrent of panic and worry. Like, what if we don't get what we need at minimum, to sort of do all the stuff we have to do. And so there was all this pressure every year. Like, maybe we should try to be more universally appealing, because that's how you make sure that you rake in people. And we definitely, every year that I was there, including the year that I was tapped, we had people kind of slip through our fingers who were very talented and seemed like a good fit and seemed like people we would want to have around. And some other group just like, and we always had this element where it wasn't just sort of a singing version of a fraternity. Like, it was a real musical group with a musical perspective that was unusual, and to be taken seriously. And I think that, that was appealing, but at the same time it could be intimidating. At the same time, for some people it was a little bit off-putting, because we could seem a little standoffish because we were more serious about what we were doing, I think, in some ways. I mean, not to denigrate what other people were doing. But I would say, like, that even if it means that we weren't a fit for as many people, that the uniqueness of Shades is something that's really ultimately, it's not just worth preserving, it is the thing, I think, to preserve, because otherwise you don't really need it. I mean, the fact is, I don't know how many singing groups there are at Yale now, but there were 12 or 13 when I was there, and it seemed like that was probably like 9 or 10 too many, just in terms of there was a certain redundancy. I mean, some of them had their own little niche that they fit in, but the world does not necessarily need another a cappella singing group just for its own sake. But whereas I think the world definitely did need what Shades really was, which was a group that had some soul and sang good music and did that well. And so, my words of wisdom would just be to resist that pull, if that's still a pull. How do I know? I mean, for all I know, this isn't an issue at all anymore. But I think that the pull to be more the same in order to make sure that you get all your bases covered is something to be aware of and be resisted, because then you don't want to the greatest extent possible, you don't want to dilute what's special about Shades. Because I definitely feel that, at least when I was there, Shades was very special, and I think that's why I look back on it so fondly. I think it doesn't just, as the years go by, it doesn't just kind of recede into like, oh, I was a kid and I did this and I did that and I sang with these people, and it still feels specific. I mean, one thing I always wondered is, will the repertoire still, like, because the repertoire was this mix of sort of, some gospel stuff, some stuff that was sort of timeless, but then some stuff that was very contemporary, which was one of the things that was different, was like everyone else was seeing, these a cappella, whatever, these, try not to be rude, but just these songs, like, da, 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 da. And then we were singing, stuff that at the time was like very current. And then also like when the men's ensembles or the women's ensembles would do their little, usually each concert, I don't know if they still do that, but there'd be a men's ensemble and a women's ensemble, and that would be something usually that was very current, like that would be, but at the time, so like SWV or, whatever. So I always wondered, like, as these songs, if they become preserved in the repertoire, then they will be less and less current. And if you're going to keep the sort of traditional stuff, the gospel stuff, the Sweet Honey and the Rock stuff or whatever, and you're going to keep a bunch of the songs that right now are like just a few years old, that there's less and less room for new songs that are just a few years old. And so I always wondered, like, will it evolve to be its own form of, musical preservation society, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but, where, very much like the Whiffenpoofs, where what the Whiffenpoofs are singing is, pop music from 80 years ago or whatever. So is it going to be pop music from 10 years ago that becomes pop music from 20 years ago that becomes pop music from 30 years ago? Or is it going to continue to be traditional music mixed with pop music from 2 years ago or pop music from this year or whatever? And I don't know what I envision as the future. I'm curious about that aspect of it, like how the musical identity of the group will evolve. And I have to admit, my preference is, obviously there are some songs that are sort of timeless, and I hope that they stay in the repertoire. But I liked the fact that Shades felt current was, there were two things about Shades that I thought were reasons why you would actually want to go and hear Shades, even if you weren't a college student in this college where there are like all these a cappella groups, which is not the world, right? One was the style in which we sang, which was, I think, had a lot more soul to it than the average. And the other was that the music was music that you were listening to when you were in high school, if not when you were in college. At least some of it. And so I kind of hope that continues to be an aspect of how Shades is. And if it's not, I'm sure Shades will be great anyway, but I liked that. I always felt like anyone who would give this a chance would enjoy it just because it's good to listen to. Well, I am in a PhD program for animal behavior. So this summer I'm going to go to the Masai Mara Game Preserve in Kenya and study hyenas, but they don't have any hyenas in Philadelphia where I live. So during the regular year I study birds at an aviary outside of Philadelphia. So I finished my master's thesis, which is the first year of my PhD program. You get a master's if you complete that year. And my work for the year was based on these birds that I study. But I did a lot of others. I did education stuff for like 5 or 6 years after school, but then I got tired of that. So, I used to work at a nonprofit called the Center for Children and Technology in Manhattan, they sort of studied like what technology is and is not good for in classrooms, because a lot of computers kind of go in classrooms. People don't really know what to do with them, but they just feel like, well, computers are today, the youth of today, and blah blah blah. And so the idea was, okay, but what are computers really good for, and when are they actually not helpful? And let's get some like research behind the claims that people make about, like, we're going to buy every kid a laptop and then they'll become better students just because. Well, when my wife and I got together, we kind of said, okay, let's think about whether we're doing what we want to be doing. So I wanted to be doing something outdoors. And or I wanted to be in a famous performer. But no one was offering me that job, so I went with the animal behavior thing.
It still is curious, though. How have you always loved animals? Have you always been curious about it? And
I'm curious about nature. I wasn't like an animal. I wasn't one of those like, you know, like I didn't have a dog. I didn't have a pony or whatever people have, depending on who they are. But I was very interested in watching animals and thinking about what they were thinking about. So, well, there's an interesting thing. Monkeys do this thing that they have lots of conflict all the time, as people do. But in a lot of social monkeys, if you act aggressively towards someone, you then very shortly thereafter you do some reconciliation thing. You kind of reach out a hand and you pat them, or you stroke them, or you make a sort of a sound at them that, and it's sort of, that's the flow of things. Like there's a lot of like, oh, don't take my banana, but then especially dominant animals will kind of soothe subordinate ones after they have reprimanded them. So, and I always thought I think that's a useful thing that, like, people, I think, put a little too much significance on every negative interaction that happens between people, as if those things shouldn't happen, and then have a hard time reconciling when those kinds of things do happen. Whereas, like, I think it's useful to see that, that kind of, mutual aggression and friction is kind of inevitable in any social group, and better to express it and then do something affirmative towards reconciling, and then go on to the next banana or whatever. So I think that's useful. It's hard to keep in mind in real life, but I think it's useful. I mean, I had to miss the 20th anniversary get together, and I was sad about it. I mean, I couldn't go, but I felt bad about it. I spent the whole weekend, I wrote this to you, TT, but I spent the whole weekend kind of humming my solos to myself. No one ever wanted to sing Kissing a Fool. And then, of course, I knew that I was like, I wrote that to you, and then I was like, oh, I bet she arranged Kissing a Fool. So now she's going to be like, what? But people didn't want to sing. I like the background to Kissing a Fool, but I couldn't get people to sing it with me. Anyway, because, no, I sing to my son a lot, who is 2. And Jack is very musical, and we have, notions that would be something he would take seriously when he's older. Shades, within its smaller world, like the equivalent, to feel that, I think that central, you'd have to be a pop star or an R&B star,
Yes.
Whatever. You'd have to be famous, and obviously most people aren't going to be famous. So it's more unique in the span of your life than I think you can possibly realize when you're of college age. So listen to me, young Shades people. Just prepare to be sad and old and alone and singing to yourself in the shower. No one wants to hear you. You can sing your solo. You know what's even sadder is when you're singing like your bass part alone in the shower and you're going do 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 do. No one wants to hear that. Even you don't want to hear that, but you're still gonna do it every now and then because you're gonna be like, I remember when I was in Shades and I was saying do 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 do. And I'm sorry about that for you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's gonna be hard for you, all you Shadeses of now.